Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we're discussing one of the most significant shifts currently impacting enterprise cybersecurity risk: the growing use of artificial intelligence in phishing operations and the rise of increasingly adaptive polymorphic attacks. As AI enables attackers to create more convincing, personalized, and scalable campaigns, phishing is evolving from a tactical security challenge into a broader business resilience issue. In today's discussion, we'll explore how AI is reshaping the phishing threat landscape, what this means for CISOs and executive leadership teams, and how organizations can move beyond reactive defenses toward a more intelligence-driven approach that improves visibility, resilience, and response effectiveness. My name is Carolyn Gallagher, and I'm a marketing content specialist here at Cofense. Before we begin, I'd like to briefly introduce our speakers. Mark Olson is CEO of Cofense and a veteran security and technology executive with more than 30 years of experience leading innovation and growth across organizations including TokenX, SIFT, Splunk, and McAfee. Throughout his career, Mark has helped organizations drive business transformation, improve operational efficiency, and deliver advanced security and machine learning solutions at scale. Joining him is George Gerchow, Cofense Board Advisor and Chief Security Officer at Bedrock Data. George is a three-time CISO with more than 2 decades of experience across cybersecurity, compliance, and cloud security, and AI governance. He previously served as CISO at MongoDB and Chief Security Officer at Sumo Logic, and today George advises organizations on trusted AI adoption, cloud security, and emerging technology risk. Both Mark and George bring executive leadership and hands-on security experience to today's discussion, making them uniquely positioned to share perspectives on how organizations should prepare for the next phase of AI-driven phishing threats. Before we get started, I do want to give a very brief note on logistics. This session is being recorded and will be available on demand on our website over the coming days. We also very much encourage you to submit your questions throughout the discussion using the Q&A window on your console. If there are any questions we don't have time to address today, we'll follow up with you via email after the webinar. Okay, so without further ado, let's get started. Mark and George, AI is not the first major shift in phishing, but many leaders believe that this one is different. From your perspective, what has fundamentally changed about the attacker's speed, scale, and adaptability today? George, do you want to take it away to start?
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for having me. I'm blushing at that introduction and so happy to be working with Mark. I think the lure went from expensive to free and flawless now. AI has just brought so many different attack vectors to what we saw before, so AI can rewrite each single email, the subject, the wording, the sender, the link, so nothing looks identical anymore. And it's able to do it at scale. And so like now it can be fully autonomous, hands-on keyboard campaigns coming, but behind it, it's all definitely AI. Script kiddies are able to grab it and just do so much damage within an environment and get very creative about the way that phishing emails come in. And so it's one of those things that just the scale and speed, as you mentioned before, the personalization, the adaptation is just really taking a lot of organizations by surprise.
Yeah, I'll add to that, and thanks, George, and thanks, Carolyn, too. It's great to be here. The stats that I have seen are AI drives like phishing campaigns at 200x. So, what used to take 16 hours for an attacker to develop their, malicious attack takes 5 minutes now. So there's really like a 200x gain in scale and speed that George was talking about.
That's great. Thank you. We often hear about AI-powered phishing, but what does that actually look like operationally for enterprise security teams today? How are attackers using AI in ways organizations may still be underestimating? Mark, do you think you could lead with this one?
Yeah, sure. And kind of building on that scale, right? That they're getting the 200x scale. What we're seeing is that attacks really are polymorphic, which sounds like a fancy term for those that may not be familiar with it. But George alluded to it already, right? Which is just that each attack, each email in the attack is varied by something, whether it's the subject line, whether it's the URL, or whether it's the personalization. But these emails now, again, due to AI, are varied in some way so that one specific signature, one specific rule makes it very hard to be able to, thwart the attack or mitigate get the attack. So this continued like variation of attacks. But that's one area. There are two other areas where I think that AI really comes into play, which is multi-channel now. Right? Again, AI is enabling a sophisticated set of attacks across chat, voice, text, and email. I mean, email is still the dominant one, but AI again leverages efficiency for the attacker and to be multi-channel, and then just highly personalized. AI can even scrape at again very sort of effective rates, a high degree of personalized information that can be applied to the attack.
Yeah, and to add on to that, Mark, very well said. I can remember when ChatGPT first came out, when I was at Sumo Logic, we ran our first phishing campaign all through ChatGPT. It was one of the most effective campaigns that we've ever had in the way of just exposure. Like that's a whole separate conversation as to how effective those are. But I knew at that time that we were going to start seeing this whole new era in phishing, and especially the polymorphic piece that you described. So one of the things that's caught me off guard is the real-time conversation phishing. So it's not static email anymore. Attackers can run chatbots on the other end that answer your questions, handle objections, and just keep the con going across email. And the lure adapts to the victim live, which is just something that we've never seen before. And then also, there was a recent case of Meta where, an AI support bot was talked into resetting passwords, on a high profile Instagram accounts. And so they didn't phish the person, they actually phished the agent. So now we're seeing
Mm.
phishing the AI, not just the human. So where this is going, it's just not going to stop. And I think that it's going to get more and more creative over time. And we've got to better prepare ourselves for what's coming in the future.
That's fascinating. Thanks, George. Traditional phishing defense often evaluates threats email by email. Why is that model breaking down as phishing becomes more coordinated, adaptive, and campaign driven? What does that campaign level visibility make possible that message level detection misses? George, do you think you can take it away here?
Sure, absolutely. When you're looking at things email by email, you're really not looking at the full pattern of everything that's taking place. It's more traditional fingerprinting that we've done for a long time. And as we know, it just hasn't been very effective. You got to look at the holistic attacks that are coming in. And I also think getting a human feedback loop in the middle of it is absolutely critical. So as much as we're leveraging AI for security, there's no better real-time detection tool in the world than the human being and helping us with the patterns that we're seeing out there. And so that traditional looking at it email by email and trying to leverage those same fingerprinting patterns that we've had out there for a long time just has not been effective to this point.
Yeah, I mean, that is great, George. There's not a lot for me to add there other than, hey, like the attacks today are polymorphic. That is what's happening. They're multi-channel. They're coming in campaigns. So our defenses have to be adapted, being able to spot that and detect that.
Great. Thank you. As both executives, I think you'll both be able to speak to this one, but Mark, I want to start with you. What are the biggest blind spots boards and executives still have when they assess phishing risk, especially now that AI is changing attacker behavior so much?
Yeah, so I think there are two, for me, interrelated things going on there. One is like defense in depth, right? Executives and boards have to realize that they need defense in depth. There's no one solution that is going to be the panacea, right? And be able to capture everything. They have to embrace defense in depth. And I think what drives that to me is something that I've kind of coined the automation gap, where automated solutions can do a fantastic job of detecting remediating, mitigating, and they're crucial, right? The defense in depth, you need a secure email gateway, right? You need perimeter defenses. You need post perimeter defenses. The defense in depth enables multiple threat intelligence databases, machine learning models to do their to do their best at filtering out attacks. At the end of the day, there's still going to be a set of novel 0 day attacks that basically reach the inbox, right? They reach the target. And no matter how much we improve our automation, attackers are always going to then find another nuanced, novel approach to reach their target. So there's always going to be this automation gap. It's not like ever going to go away. I think that's a blind spot for some boards of, okay, so we still need protection, right, to address that gap, which just, our job is to compress the gap as much as possible. I just don't feel like it's ever going to go away.
Wow, that was so well said. I love hearing you say defense in depth because I think we went away from that, and a lot of us security veterans, been around for a while. That's kind of the way we came up was having multiple layers to be able to defend the environment. We kind of got caught up in zero trust. And I'm not saying I don't believe in zero trust. I think the concept is a good one, but it takes defense in depth. As you mentioned, layers, from the perimeter to the end user. But the funny thing about the board conversation is that I think, the board sort of measured click rates, like we talked about before, and trying to minimize those when the real exposure is what an authenticated user or an AI agent can reach, after a perfect lure lands. Like that's really the risk. And that's what we should start looking at. And the click's not the failure point anymore. Standing access is. And so for a long time, we've known that credentials are the number one way of data security incidents that now happen within AI apps or apps in general. And machine identities are starting to outnumber humans with some crazy stats of 80 to 1 in most enterprises. So it's an identity and authorization story for sure.
Fascinating. Thank you. Building off of that, as attackers increasingly use AI to create these highly personalized and adaptive phishing campaigns that we've been talking about, what capabilities do you feel that CISOs should prioritize over these next 12 to 24 months? Mark, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, so I think it's building on the defense in depth that George and I just chatted about, right? And so what do those priorities look like? So to me, one is AI, right? But okay, but what does that mean? Like lots of people are using AI, and there's a lot of different types of AI out there, right? Some AI approaches things from a behavioral standpoint. Some approaches it from a threat standpoint, and both are incredibly valuable. I don't think it's a which one's better. I think it's different. So it supports the defense in depth. But ultimately, it's an extrapolation, right? How does your AI extrapolate these patterns and approaches that attackers are going to take, right? And then there's a transparency to it. So it's crucial to me that the AI is explainable so that SOCs, security operations centers can determine like how they want to leverage the confidence of that extrapolation, right, and apply it. So I think there's this AI dynamic. The second part is multi-channel, as we've chatted about, have to be looking at multi-channel defense, that attacks are going to come in from multi-vector. How do we approach that? And then the third thing I'll say is the employee vigilance, and George alluded to this as well, right? When the attacks are so sophisticated, so personalized, so engaging, as George said as well, right? They're luring you. There's a back and forth. The vigilance to me comes with confirmation, right? How do employees get really wired into confirming anything suspicious, and and double checking things to try to again, ultimately identify the attack.
Yeah, that's a great place for me to pick up right there because it does go back to defense in depth. And I think keeping the human on the loop, not out of it, is another form of defense in depth and
Right.
potentially the best one. let AI own the volume, triage, correlation, summarization, but keep the judgment and authority, to act with your analysts or, as you just said, Mark, clearly the employees as well too. The balance is the whole game. And I also think that we need to govern agents, their identity and treat them as non-privileged human identities, not a feature. And so that's one of the things that's also been missing. Like I really believe that a lot of times the board and executive teams ask the wrong questions around AI. How are we using AI seems to be, the answer. When you go to RSA, Black Hat, Gartner, which I was just recently at, it's just AI everywhere, so security for AI and then AI for security. But there doesn't really seem to be, that defense in depth strategy that you're talking about, which is something that I've always tried to implement at every organization I've ever been at. And so you got to look at your top challenges within the organization, and polymorphic phishing is definitely one of those. But how can potential technology help you resolve some of those problems? And sometimes AI is going to be part of it, as I mentioned before, in a triage stage, and other times, like having that human to have that judgment, I think is just so invaluable to be able to do that.
Absolutely. George, I'd love to kind of build off of that with this next question, especially since we mentioned you're a three-time CISO. We'd like to know, how should CISOs think about AI in the SOC particularly? As a path to automation, as analyst augmentation, or as broader redesign of how phishing investigations and response decisions happen?
I think it needs to be a broader redesign. I feel like a lot of times in the SOC, it's been one of those things where, let's say you have someone who's clicked on a funky link. It goes to the IR team, they go through their investigation, and then, it goes back to training, which I believe in that too, like making the person go back through training and everything else. But then it just, that cycle just continues. We really haven't done anything to break that. What I think really needs to happen is now, um, having that information come back into the SOC analysts, and for the analysts to be able to see, like, was there a lot of volume or correlation? Did the person keep judgment and an authority to act? Correlating every variant that may be possibly taking place within the environment. And then, as Mark mentioned before, the remediation piece, so being able to get that instant threat intelligence and then having a remediation playbook, I think it's massive to be able to do that, because like right now, it just seems like we sort of play whack-a-mole when these things come in, and they're never really truly investigated through the SOC or go through a full post-mortem to help us be able to prevent these things moving forward, as well as just run key playbooks and start, trying to minimize the time. Because like the old way just, again, wasn't really working. A user reports a suspicious email, and then the analyst open it, detonates the link, checks the sender, grabs the log to see who else got it, pulled it, 20 to 40 minutes, and the queue just never empties. So we've got to move into this new phase of automation, deeper reporting, deeper intelligence within the security operations center.
Yeah, I mean, again, I completely agree, George. There is an overhaul, right, redesign that really needs to happen, and I think a big part of it is the augmentation, right, of that triage activity. We've spent a fair amount of time talking about how much automation we can do in the initial detection, right? A little bit of like defense in depth within defense in depth here, right? Where there's automated detection. We know there are still going to be novel zero-day attacks that we're going to rely on employees to report, right? At that stage, how much of that can we automate, right? Of the triage, how much sort of head start can we give the analyst in terms of data, confidence, explainability, detonation, right? How much of all of that can be automated with an analyst oversight, like with an analyst confirmation, with an analyst check that is going to be required, right? And ultimately, then when we get that confirmation, then I think it's how fast can we get that confirmation back into the ML and the AI, right? And the EX, how do we ensure that the community gets to benefit from that very, initial confirmation?
Great, thank you both. Security leaders are being asked to improve resilience while still controlling cost, headcount, and complexity. Where can AI create real leverage in phishing defense? Where should executives be cautious about overpromising as well? George, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I think that over-promising piece is where a lot of folks are getting in trouble. It's not going to solve every problem in the world. It's not going to solve world hunger, but it definitely has a time and place. And I'm a heavy, heavy, heavy AI user. We were just talking about the SOC. I wrote my entire SOC out of Claude, just to give you an example. But those use cases made sense. It's always going to be more in, like Mark just said, that initial triage, the detonation, anything that it can take off that's a repeatable, scalable task that usually an analyst has to get their hands on. And so that's where I really see like AI working in the security space quite a bit. And that's that AI for security piece, which I love. For years we've been talking about how we can't scale ourselves and there's so many open positions out there in cybersecurity because the expertise and the skills just aren't there. Well, now we can definitely start closing some of that gap and augment what we've currently been doing as well.
Yeah, there's always the classic do more with less, right? We're all being asked to do that every day. I feel like I'm being asked in my home to do more with less every day. Um, but I think we come back to this overpromise that George just said, right? And it's a bit of the blind spot too, Carolyn, that you asked about earlier, right? That I think the blind spot is that AI is being, expected and asked to do a lot more than it's capable of, right? And I know the example that I've used now for a little while is from sports. And so we know that there are a variety of Olympian level athletes or professional athletes that decide to cheat or take performance enhancing drugs, which is unfortunate. But the testers, who are trying to identify this and keep the sport clean, they keep improving and keep coming up with new ways to test for performance enhancing drugs. And as soon as they do, of course, the athletes who want to cheat are going to find other ways, right?
Mm,
So
mhm.
there's a real parallel here where in sport for 50 plus years or more, right, there's been this gap of the testers and then the cheaters, and it will continue, and I think it's the same in cybersecurity as well, certainly the same in phishing defense, right? So as protectors, we need to do our absolute best to compress that gap, but just be aware to me like that gap exists. So then what can we do in the do more with less to address that gap?
What a killer analogy that was. I'm stealing that.
Yeah, I was just going to say the same. I'm going to remember that one. All right. There's a growing conversation right now around signal overload in security operations. What signals or metrics should security leaders use to know whether their phishing defense program is becoming more resilient and not just generating more alerts or faster detections? Mark, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I think I'll play off of the gap comment that I just made because hey, there's a lot of automated approaches to just like you said, like whether it's dwell time or how quickly are we auto detecting. But I think if we focus on the gap, right, that ongoing gap of where automation sort of just taps out, at least for that moment in time, it continues to improve, but it taps out, and I think that's an area to pay really close attention to. And so one of those, excuse me, for me is what is the remediation time of an employee reported
Mm,
attack, right? Because that's honing right in on that gap that I believe will sort of constantly exist. So how well are we addressing that? And I think that comes down to you're beyond the auto detection, right? So we're now talking about a very unique, sophisticated zero-day attack that has avoided the defense in depth of auto detection, and it's sitting there. How quickly are we mitigating that, right? What's that sort of dwell time of that unique sort of gap attacks that I think is very relevant for security organizations to be able to measure.
yeah, and Carolyn, this one's like so near and dear to my heart because the metrics are just always so all over the place. And I'll just like I guess I'll talk about this one in an example of two SOCs, in the same week. We have SOC A and SOC B. SOC A, which is a little bit more legacy, traditional, brags about triaging 10,000 phishing alerts and cutting detection time by 30%. SOC B triaged far fewer, but its user reporting rate climbed and the dwell time dropped that Mark was talking about, and the cost per resolved incident fell. So SOC B is winning in my mind. SOC A is just measuring like how busy it is when what really matters is the count that proves resilience, reporting rate, dwell time, cost per solved incident, and then analyst hours recovered, which AI can definitely help with that as well too. More alerts faster is just emotion. It's not progress.
That's a great way of putting it. Thanks, George. Some organizations are still heavily reactive in their phishing defense. For those organizations, what practical steps do you guys think they should take first to move forward to a more intelligence-driven campaign level model? Kind of using that comparison you just used, George, do you think you could build off of that with this one?
Absolutely. Discovery first. I pride myself that in any organization I'm in, the security team's very approachable. People make mistakes, and we want a self-reporting environment. So culture is a big piece of it, but that starts with the discovery side. Your employees have to trust that they can come forward. So I would say discovery first, and then scope one agent to a bounded high volume risk task. So phishing triage, as Mark and I have mentioned before, is a perfect human or a perfect fit for AI. But the human on the loop is definitely, I think, where it's at as well too, because we're going to learn more by these polymorphic attacks and the different vectors are coming in, the personalization, the conversational stuff we talked about before. We're going to learn most of that really from the human side.
Yeah, again, I completely agree that intelligence, comes in a variety of forms. At the highest level, I've talked about that there's behavioral intelligence and threat intelligence, right? But how do we combine them with that human in the loop, that human confirmation where they've like said, hey, like these set of things are happening, and then how do we extrapolate from there, right? I think that's all part of like an intelligence driven approach.
Great. All right, I think we have time for one more question before we kick off the Q&A. So I want to look ahead about 3 to 5 years. How do you expect AI to reshape the balance between attackers and defenders in phishing defense? And what decisions do you think security leaders should be making now to prepare?
Who do you
George,
want
you
to
want to
take that,
start? Yes,
Carolyn?
sorry.
I'm happy
I
to
love that.
I'm happy to jump in,
Okay.
and let George trump that. So I think it's about like we've covered a lot of important ground. I feel, and I think it's really about community, right? At this point, looking ahead that 3 to 5 years, I've said where I think there's still going to be that gap in 3 to 5 years or whatever the number of years are. And so, how collectively as a community are we able to address and mitigate that gap, right? It is the constantly working together, improving AI models, training AI models, taking different approaches, understanding those approaches. But how fast, as a community, can we mitigate the 0 day attack, right? That new for the moment, novel, sophisticated attack. As a community, how quickly can we address that, right? Spot it once and enable all organizations to benefit. Like to me, that's sort of that's the looking ahead, and just how do we continue to work together, partner together as a community.
Yeah, and again, that's so well said because the attackers are a community. So over the last
Right.
few years, we've started seeing ransomware as a service, and they have a community. They work together to be able to attack environments and get creative around ideas, and then sharing different attack vectors as well too. But particularly when it comes to, like AI, adopt fast, like I do, but govern first. Like I think that adopting fast and govern first are not intention, they're actually the same move. So it's got to be like that fine balance of both of those to really be able to move forward and accelerate, whatever your security strategy goals may be.
Excellent. Thank you both. Now let's go ahead and kick off the Q&A portion. As a reminder, please put your questions in the Q&A panel and we'll get to as many as we can. Thank you. All right, great. So let's go ahead and take a look at these questions. The first one that I have here is Mark and George, when you're speaking with boards or executive leadership teams, what do you feel is the biggest misconception that you still hear about when it comes to phishing risk and organizational preparedness? George, do you want to take it away with this one first?
Sure. It's usually, that click ratio. Like, are we reducing the amount of clicks happening within the organization? Who's actually getting got? There's like so much complexity around that, but it's never really an effective thing to start minimizing what's actually happening or minimizing the threat. The other thing I'll say too is a lot of times, it's executives themselves who who always seem to click on the wrong links. And I like to start there a lot of times is like, you're not trying to shame anyone, but it's like, look, you have to set the example here, and reach out a little bit earlier. So anyway, it's a funny answer.
Yeah, it's not me, it's you, right? That's the problem. Building on that, I think too, it comes back to this, um, you know, AI misconception, like AI, at least currently when we talk to executives, where AI can solve everything. Can't AI, like, I'm fighting AI with AI, but it should be able to solve everything. And, you know, as we've talked about it, it still comes up a little short.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. All right, another one here is if an organization had budget for only one major improvement to its phishing defense program this year, where would you recommend investing first? Mark, do you want to take this one first?
Yeah, yeah, sure. Thanks. I think it's defense in depth, and something we've talked a lot about over the last half hour or so. But that's where I would invest. We think about misconceptions a little bit. It's that, well, my perimeter defense will solve everything, right? My secure email gateway will solve everything. My AI automation will solve everything, and so I think that investment comes down to just best in class defense in depth.
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, like we just said, I just love coming back to that term because I think a lot of times what happens is an organization will just put one piece in place, like whether it's network defense or endpoint, as you just mentioned as well, and not really start looking at the complexity of these attacks and the layers it's going to take to protect us against them. The other problem too, a lot of times is the vendors, coming, when you see the advertisements and the architecture around, we solve everything. You know what I mean? It's like they're like the one-stop shop, and it's a very complex problem, and it takes a complex solution sometimes in layers to be able to defend against it.
Absolutely. All right, let me take a look for more questions here. Here's another one. What's one change you believe we'll see in phishing defense over the next 3 years or so that people aren't planning for today? I know that's kind of a hard question, but do you guys have any ideas? George, do you want to start first or?
Sure. That is like a very complex question because things are moving so rapidly right now. Like every time you tune in or look at the internet or the news, it's just something different that's happening in our space and it's moving at such a fast pace. I think there's going to be some kind of meeting in the middle versus the human response and AI response. And the categories of who does what will become clear over time. Right now, as Mark said, everyone's answer is always like, well, AI can go out there and take care of that. And we're seeing that in some areas it's working, some areas it's not. And so I think a clear delineation and boundaries around who's doing what between humans and AI is probably where we're going to end up landing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I think that, the sophistication is going to continue to increase. That high degree of personalization will continue to evolve over the next 3 years. And how do we keep that gap compressed when that happens, right? But again, staying vigilant, that detection is just going to get increasingly harder.
Yeah, those are great answers. Thank you, guys. I know that was kind of a tough one. Another question I have here is what do you feel is the biggest mistake you're seeing organizations make when they're trying to modernize these phishing defense programs? You might have already just spoken to it a little bit, but you want to take it away? Maybe Mark, do you want to start or?
Yeah, I think we can build on what we've chatted about there, right? Which is that, I think it's still this automation only that um, AI and automation can solve, my problems, or it's good enough. And it could be good enough until there's a breach, um, right? And that's where I kind of come back to this best in class, which is, hey, we need to leverage AI. Like, absolutely. And I don't want to be confused in saying anything different, right? That it's crucial for us to leverage AI to automate as much of the detection as possible, but just be aware that there is this gap. It's going to fall short. And then what are we doing about those threats? Right?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think what you just said about good enough is where we always get in trouble. And then, like you said, there's a breach, there's an incident, and then everyone is scrambling after that, and being a CISO, that's always just so hard because you want to try to do the right things. But budget obviously dictates a lot of it. And then all of a sudden, when there's an incident or a breach, you get everything you want. But at that point, it's like too late, and a light is shined on you as well too. So I think that good enough approach, we've just got to get past that, and really start seeing where the threats are. Phishing's been around for a long time, and like as you said, the sophistication is not going to go away. When you start thinking about the sophistication with AI, we're putting so much information about ourselves into generative AI. And so it's going to get smarter and smarter and smarter about who we are and personalizing those attacks. So the future can be quite terrifying if we don't get those layers in place and really get to defense in depth.
Agreed. George, we have a question here that kind of really nicely piggybacks off of what you just said. So I have one here that asks for organizations that still feel like they are playing catch up or maybe on that good enough, as you mentioned. What are some warning signs that their phishing defenses aren't keeping pace with today's threats? So, what's something they should be looking for before they have a breach that they might be not be seeing right now?
Yeah, I think it all starts at the very basic level of, are you getting feedback from your employees? Are the folks that are within your corporate umbrella, are you understanding what they're seeing from their end? As we mentioned, over the last, you know, 40 minutes or so, that getting that piece is just absolutely critical because we just don't know what we don't know sometimes. And, not understanding the way that these attacks are coming in, how personalized they are, and then having that culture of, being approachable to security teams is just huge. That's the only way that we're going to be able to keep up. And Mark stated it earlier, it's a combination of AI, but that human in the loop, that's the only way we're going to start seeing what's taking place. And especially for an organization that's behind, like I think start there, see what's really happening, with your end users.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It starts with the user, and when you're sort of playing catch up or playing behind, I think it is, well, what is the number of emails that are being reported, the suspicious emails? How many of those actually are suspicious? What's the load on your security operations center and your analysts, right? What kind of fatigue are they under in terms of, I think, being behind the eight ball here and playing catch up?
Awesome. Thank you both. All right. I think we have time for about one more question. So I'll just start with that and then we can wrap up because we're getting close to time. Not every this question I have here is not every organization has a large SOC or dedicated phishing team. What's the first thing a lean security team should do to improve resilience against these kinds of attacks?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in there and say that, one of the first things I would recommend is a managed service, right? So for a lean team, you still want best in class defense in depth. I don't think you want to rely on automation only or good enough, right? You want to be able to address that gap, those novel, zero-day attacks, which are going to rely on an employee reporting them. And I think the managed service that specializes in that is really a natural way to augment those lean teams.
Yeah, that was really well said. I don't have too much to add past
Yeah.
that because it's definitely the way to go is augment your team with some help. And then from a technical perspective, like making sure that you get the right phishing data into the SOC, Security Operations Center analysts, to be able to see what's happening, I think would be crucial as well.
Great points. Thank you. Okay, I think that is about all of the time that we have today. If I want to thank everyone as we wrap up for the thoughtful questions, and please know that if we did not get to your question today, we'll follow up with you via email. As a reminder, this session is part of our broader series that we're doing on polymorphic phishing. We've also published a white paper titled Inside the Shape-Shifting Inbox, Polymorphic Phishing Explained, which is available now on our website, and I highly recommend it. I want to provide a very special thank you to Mark and George for sharing their insights and leadership perspectives today on this really rapidly evolving topic. We appreciate your time and hope today's discussion provides useful guidance as you evaluate the future of phishing defense within your own organizations. And we hope you all have a really great day. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone.
Thanks, Carolyn.
Bye.
Take care.